radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
Good evening. How you doing? Fade to Black. Today is Wednesday, August 5th, 2026. Let's do this, man. Very excited. What a great week here on the show. Monday, we had Emily Harrison in here and the Akashic Records. Last night, Cody Blue Snyder and Tanya Dahl were here. Acid for Squares. Tonight, Tom Campbell is with us. My Big Toe. That's right. That's what we're going to do tonight. Very excited about the conversation that's about to happen. And then tomorrow night, Richard Dolan is here. The show was called Dolan's Thoughts, which we always do with Richard Bleepin' Dolan when he is on the show. Very excited about the conversation tonight, and we're going to pack a lot in. I'll start with this. If you, and you have done a lot, if you have paid attention to this show over the last 15 years, you know where my focus lies. Well, a little bit of Egypt and ancient history and stuff like that, and of course UFOs and so. But my focus through all of my research and interviewing the thousands of guests that I've done on this show has pointed me in two directions: physics, science, and consciousness. And when are they going to merge? You know, and I it doesn't matter who the guest is on the show. It doesn't matter. It could be a musician or a comedian or a scientist. It just doesn't matter. I ask them these questions because everybody's got a take on it. Why? We all have consciousness and we all wonder about it. And we all dip our toes in science. And then there's the paranormal and the supernatural and the other parts of this community that I enjoy so much. As I go through this on this journey, it leads me back constantly to those 2 points. And I talk about it every single night. Now, who do I talk to about this? It's Tom Campbell. That's what we do, and that's what we are going to do tonight. He has built his career around all of this. I'm talking about 50 years in physics, 37 years in professional physics work, which includes missile defense systems. Of course, he did his PhD in nuclear physics. But all of this led him to the writing of his book, My Big Toe, combining hardcore science and physics and the thought of what is actually going on with consciousness, and could consciousness be the key to everything, which led to the book, My Big Toe. Toe being the theory of everything. All of his life's experience has come together for the moment for me on the show tonight. I'm very excited. Let's do it. Let's get it started. Thomas Campbell, he's right there. Tom, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
So good to see you again. So good to see you. I want to start here. Last year, when I met you for the first time, I was able to, I introduced you, but I sat through your presentation. We did a couple of things together that weekend at the Psy Games, but watching the audience stay laser focused on your presentation, aside from the parts where they were screaming and yelling and applauding when you made some points, but was so compelling. And I was sitting there, I followed you forever, but I just sat there and went, this is my guy. I feel like he's speaking to me. and so did everybody else. That's a heavy responsibility, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I'd say it's a heavy responsibility. It's who I am and what I do, and people find that interesting because in your monologue to start, you said the key question you ask is about consciousness and science, and when are those two going to meet? And that's what I've been doing for the last 50, 60 years.
And we're gonna talk about this in depth tonight. And I am going to start here. I was almost going to do something foundational and why physics and where you felt your expertise was. You're a physicist. It's there. It's in your CV. Let's move on from that. I want to say something and ask you a question. One night in bed, in the dark, when my mind is working, probably just like yours, I was in the middle of one of Brian Greene's books or Sean Carroll or something, and it hit me as the conversation in physics is moving towards information doesn't go anywhere, and what happens with thought, and does thinking continue? And it hit me. Dark energy is consciousness. Now, I wasn't planting a flag here, right? But it just hit me. And I thought to myself, physicists are struggling with consciousness, struggling with dark energy and the things that we can't see, but they don't listen to themselves either in their theory or their work, or they would probably arrive at the same conclusion. Am I flying over the right target, sir?
The dark energy and consciousness are somehow related?
Yeah.
Not in the mind of physicists. They would go nuts if you said that. Right. But, in a metaphorical way, I suppose there's a connection there. But dark energy and consciousness are really two different things, even though I can see why you came to that conclusion. Dark energy is something that they posit, but they really don't know anything about or where it comes from or anything else. So it's one of those mysteries. Physicists have their equations, and when they have something that doesn't match, okay, they've come at it from this way and they've come at it from this way, except instead of doing that, it does this. When they have that problem, they make something up so that it's balanced again. So that's where dark energy comes from. They had this, and they said, there's a problem there. Well, if we assume dark energy, then that would fix it. Okay, now we have dark energy. Dark energy is something physicists make up so their equations look pretty again, and everything balances and looks good because they have this knowledge that just doesn't quite, pair up when they look at the two.
Physicists don't do that, Tom. No, see, here's the amazing thing for me as you say that. I'm not a physicist. I play one on TV. I'm not a physicist. But we, those that are not physicists and those that struggle with math, we depend on a physicist's interpretation and interpolation and translation of their math and those equations into something visual and theatrical that we can understand. But we can't vet that information because we can't go back and look at the equations and confirm them. We depend on them to paint that picture, don't we?
We do. That's why I call the physicists the high priests of Western culture. And Western culture is pretty much world culture now. Most everything is consumer and production based all over the world. The high priest job, let's go back, 6 centuries. The high priest job was to tell everybody else what to believe because everybody else can't really go to the roots and find out, so physicists have that job now. They tell everybody else what to believe, and they say, we got dark energy out there. And everybody goes, there must be dark energy out there. And, they don't really understand that, but they believe it because the physicists have told them, because the physicists are the people whose responsibility is to understand the nature of reality. So they're the hundreds, thousands of people who spend their whole careers studying the nature of reality. So who else would tell people about the nature of reality? It used to be the priests were the ones that knew about the nature of reality, but now they've lost that power. And it's kind of funny, you know, because back then, say 6 centuries ago or so, the high priests told everybody else what reality was like. And if you were contrary to those high priests, you were in for some trouble. You know, you maybe had under house arrest like Galileo or burn at the stake like somebody else, but you have a lot of trouble for bucking up against the high priests because the high priests had these beliefs and these beliefs were sacred. Now, the high priests, physicists, are materialists. And if anybody out there kind of goes up against the materialist and says, this is not a materialist reality, that's a bad idea, well, they don't burn them at the stake anymore, but they can ruin their professional career and they can give them a real hard time and call them pseudoscientists and other things. But we have the same situation. The high priests are believers. They believe in materialism and therefore determinism. And that belief is just like any religious belief or any other kind of belief. Anything they hear that is not in consonance with that belief gets them upset, and they start getting unpleasant when that happens. So it's kind of funny that we've come full course now that the high priests have a belief system, and that belief system tries to punish anybody that gets out of line. No more burning at the stake, but it's the same. It's the same idea. So there we are, just like we were, 6 or 7 centuries ago. We're in the same boat. That's why it's taken so long for science to deal with things like the paranormal and with consciousness, because science just doesn't have a clue about those things. Because, scientists think that science has to be mathematical. If it's not mathematical, then it's not real science. Well, that's not true. Math is simply the logic of quantity. You can take math and turn it into logic statements, and it works just as well. Logic and math are similar. Math is just the logic of quantity. Now take the objective world. The objective world is the measurable world. Everything's in terms of quantity. How much, how fast, how dense, where is it? It's all quantities. So there's no surprise that mathematics is really good at describing the objective world. But guess what? That objective world is like the props on a stage. It's the stuff. Nobody goes to a play to watch the props. People go to the play because of what's interesting going on between the actors and the dialogue and the drama and the points made. That's what they go to. So if you look at anybody's life and you compare the objective part of that life, the life spent in the objective world, and to the life spent in the subjective world, well, the subjective world is where beauty is. It's where justice is. It's where relationship is. All these things are not measurable. The quality of your relationship isn't measurable. They're all on the other side. Now, science will say, well, we don't go there. Science is just in the objective world.
That's right, Tom. This is what gets under my skin. Science knows that, but they just run on the road of denial.
Exactly.
Somewhere on the edge of the universe at the circle of frustration. They're out there where and here's the other part. In that other subjective real world outside of quantity is free will. And when you get 2 physicists together or a group of them, somebody will crack the free will joke and they all laugh. And that gets under my skin because they know there's a real world out there with love and biting into a delicious pizza, right? But they're in denial. It just aggravates me because they have an existence, they have a life, but they don't want to talk about it.
Well, they would tell you that this life and existence and their friends and relationships and love and all of that is just in your imagination. It's a hallucination. It doesn't really exist because, and that, of course, is obviously the most important part of our life, right? I mean, the most important part of our life isn't the props. We don't come here to be entertained by props. We come here, to make choices, to live, to connect. And physicists do too. The important part of their life is also in the subjective world, but they don't understand anything about the subjective world. So they say our science stops at the, physical world. That's it. The objective world is science. All of reality is in that objective world. Anything else is hallucination. So free will, consciousness, and time are all thrown out as things that we imagine.
Or are determined.
Yeah,
right?
Well, but determinism is like zero. It doesn't go anywhere. If you have determinism, you can't learn, you can't evolve, you can't do anything, you have no choices. So what is there? There's nothing. It's just a big zero where nothing ever happens. There is no reason, there's no point, there's no purpose. Nothing can happen, nothing can change, and that's reality. Well, that's stupid. That's not reality. That just doesn't make any sense. Tell people there is no time and there are no choices and they're not conscious. They just believe they're conscious. And I don't see how they can get away with that. That is so obviously wrong. Now, we talk about science, being objective and being mathematical. But there is science that isn't mathematical. Look at biology. Look at the theory of evolution. Okay, we had he goes around, Darwin goes around in a boat for 4 years. I think the boat was called the Beagle. And what does he do? He doesn't do math. He makes observations. And from those observations, he sees connections, correlations. So then he comes up with a theory based on those connections, correlations of his observations, and that's science. Every scientist will tell you that evolution theory is good science, yet it's not mathematically based. It's logic based. You have observations, and then you use logic to come to conclusions. Well, that's the way my science was. I did all my science in an altered state of consciousness, when it comes to doing consciousness. Now, I did my physics in the objective world just like everybody else because that's what physicists do. But when I also researched consciousness for as long as I've done physics, and it was going into an altered state of consciousness where I could do paranormal things and I could do them well enough, and my state of consciousness was precise enough that I could do experiments there. I could change a variable and see, well, how does that change the results? Change another variable, and so on. I did that for like 33 years, just changing variables and see what it made, to where I understood how all the paranormal things worked. Okay, you have to experience it. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. This isn't something you can read about in a book and learn from it. This is something you have to do and have the experience. So when I did that, I learned a few things, and one of them is that consciousness is fundamental. There was all kinds of things I could do with consciousness that modified the physical world, but there isn't anything in the physical world that fundamentally modifies or directly modifies consciousness. So what that tells you is that the arrow of causality goes from consciousness to the physical world. It's not the other way around. So learning about how the paranormal things worked and what were the, why did it work that way? Why can you do it sometimes and sometimes you can't? What was going on there? How did it work? You talked about the Akashic records, but somebody else talked about that. The Akashic records are just a database that's absolutely necessary for the rendering engine to render this reality. So that's why, people say, well, you've got these records out there, but nobody says where they come from or who put them there or why they're there. They're a necessary database for the rendering of this reality. Now, the scientists should know better, but because they are, true believers in materialism, they're kind of stuck, and they say these ridiculous things like there's no time and there's no, free will and there's no consciousness, because they're stuck in this deterministic materialist worldview. They know that with quantum physics, the knowledge that the experimenters have or don't have will affect the result of an experiment. Well, now explain that in terms of physical things. No, it has to do
that's
with
not
knowledge.
that's not supernatural at all, is it?
Right. And then they also find out with quantum physics, and when you dig down to the bottom of the pile, you don't find little particles. You don't find mass at all. You find probability. It's all based on probability. Then ask the physicists who are the atom smashers, okay, the ones that go over at CERN and throw particles together and see what comes out the other side. They will tell you that reality is information-based. And the reason they say that is that if they make an assumption, they try to do the theory and predict what's going to come out, and then they test the theory with smashing the atoms together. Well, if they use in their theory that, let's say, an electron is a little particle with a charge, they cannot get the right answer. It just doesn't work because reality isn't that way. Now, if they assume that an electron is a point, that's infinitesimal, a point, and it has the attributes of mass and the attribute of charge, now that's how you would describe an electron in a computer. And that works. They can get the right answer. So they know that's a description that is just the information describing an electron, a point with the attributes of mass and charge. That gives them the right answer because the way reality actually is exactly that. It's just information. So those scientists will tell you very clearly that their research tells them that the reality, our physical reality, our physical universe is information-based. Now, what does that mean, that it's information-based? That means it's computable. It's information. What does it mean that it's computable? Well, if we think about all the things that might imply, there's only one thing that makes any sense. Our reality, our physical universe, is a virtual reality computed in consciousness. It's not some future humans off in a thing. That's a crazy idea that has stuck with materialism. So it's consciousness. Consciousness is an information system. And if somebody goes, consciousness and information system, well, look, what are you conscious of? You're conscious of what you take in through your five senses. Those are sensors. What do? They collect data. They take that data in and then they process it a little bit. Then they compare it to memory. Oh, what was in that spot last time I looked? Then they process it a little more, and then they make an output. What am I going to do about it? Is that a tiger with sharp teeth, or is
am I going to get out of the way? Yep.
Yeah, or is that a box of gold doubloons? What is it there? So then they make a choice. Now, what is it that takes in information, has input, processes, compares to memory, processes, and then makes an output? That's the fundamental definition of an information system. That's what information. Yeah. It's a computer. Right. So the consciousness is an information system. And if you take that viewpoint, along with the fact that consciousness is fundamental, then logic will go nowhere else other than this is a virtual reality computed in consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. It computes a virtual reality. And that brings up all kinds of questions. Why would it do it? How does it do it? All these other things. And I can answer all those questions. They're not hard to answer.
And we're going to get to that. Tom, let me jump in. In. And I just interrupted you. I'm totally rude. But
I was ready to be interrupted. That's a good point to jump in.
Is this the word fundamental when dealing with consciousness is an extraordinarily huge, maybe the biggest statement that you could, it is a seriously non-trivial situation, right? like maybe the biggest non-trivial situation. But when you ask a physicist or a scientist about the origins of consciousness, they will say it's a chemical process, right? That's it. And now, wait a minute. I have to stop them right there. They won't go to the next frame that they should, which is, if science is about a theory and then testing and repeating the results in a laboratory, and you're telling me that it's a chemical process, then you should be able to measure the moment that chemical process completes and creates consciousness. But they will say we can't measure wait a minute, is it chemical or not? Is it local or non-local? And if it's local, you should be able to, by your own definition, figure it out. But they won't. Why do we have this line in the sand? This frustration. Do you understand?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they won't go to consciousness. They say the thing that it's a chemical process because they don't have anything else to say.
Correct.
What else are they going to say? It's a biological process, a biochemical process. It's up here in the brain, does it somehow? Well, that's just not true. Even neuroscientists, like even Alexander, when they look at the brain function, they will tell you the brain doesn't have anything to do with consciousness. Consciousness is too big. It's got too much going on. It does too much too fast, and there isn't any way that can happen. The brain doesn't do it. So now quantum physicists are looking at quantum mechanics to try to explain this because it's part of their non-local processes. Well, here's the logic there. That quantum physics has non-locality, and obviously consciousness has non-locality. Therefore, consciousness, must be created through some kind of quantum physics. Well, that's like saying rockets fly and birds fly. Therefore, birds must be little rockets. Just because two things have a similar ingredient doesn't make one the creator of the other. That's just bad logic. But they don't have anything else to say. And when it comes to the non-locality issue, they come up with something that's even more ridiculous, and that is their many worlds idea. Oh, okay, there's no time, but there's these many worlds, and each little slice of the many worlds is another piece of time, and you hop from one to the other. That's how time happens. You go from this piece of the many worlds to that piece, and in the hopping, that creates time. But wait a minute, guys, just the word hop implies time. Time is logically necessary to hop. And then we have this deal that then it's logically necessary to have time in order to make time. You see, just the logic isn't there. It's just bogus. You've got a bunch of believers who are struggling. It's like the guys who say the world's only 7,000 years old, and people say, yeah, well, look at these dinosaur bones. And they struggle, and they go, yeah, some scientist probably planted those bones there, just to trick us all.
God did that to test our faith.
Right. So they make something up to preserve their belief. And this is exactly what you have going on from their dark matter, dark energy, and, there's no consciousness. All of these things, consciousness is a biochemical process. That's physicists making up things that they don't know the answers to. So they make up their best guess and they leave it there because that supports their belief system. So the same kind of thing that was going on 6 centuries ago is still going on right now. I find that kind of amusing.
I agree. I can't prove it, but I think that consciousness is non-local, but I don't know where it lives. Where does it live? Where does it reside? Where does it hang out?
Okay, it's not a place. See, that is you thinking that reality has to have places in it. It has to have, three mutually perpendicular unit vectors, which divide 3 space or 4 space or any kind of space. It doesn't have space. Okay, when you when you talk about consciousness, remember, you're not in that objective world. That objective world has space in it. You're in a subjective world. The subjective world doesn't have space. How big is an idea? How much does it weigh? Can you put your idea in a box so it can't get out? No, it's non-physical. It's not a physical thing, and it doesn't have physical.
How much does a thought weigh? That's a great question.
Yeah. See?
Wow,
so how much does an idea weigh? It's non-physical. It doesn't have weight. It doesn't have volume. It doesn't have any of the attributes of being physical. So consciousness to us is a non-physical thing. Now, here's a thing to look at. I talked about virtual reality. If you are a character, let's say you're an elf in a virtual reality game. All right. But you're a smart elf in this virtual reality game. Now, where is the server? Well, you won't find the server inside the virtual reality game. The server is non-physical to the characters inside the virtual reality game. Where's the player? Oh, you can't find the player either. The player is not inside the virtual reality that you're playing in. It's outside. It's non-physical. So when you're in a virtual reality, the player and the computer are not physical. They're in some other reality, but they're not in your physical reality. That's from the viewpoint of the elf, you see. Now we're in the same boat, okay? Now who are we? We are a piece of consciousness. I call that in my work an individuated unit of consciousness. We're a piece of consciousness, and we're part of that larger consciousness system, which is all consciousness. Now, consciousness is an information system. It computes this physical reality as a virtual reality, okay? And we are a piece of consciousness. We're the player. We make all the choices for that avatar, just like you do in World of Warcraft or Sims. You make all the choices. That player can't make any choices on their own. You make all the choices, your consciousness. So the virtual reality only creates, or only, renders what somebody can see. When it renders your elf, it doesn't render blood, going through veins and a heart pumping and, a brain inside its head. It just renders what the players can see. It's the same with us. So we're sitting here talking to each other, and in our own little physical space here on this planet, nothing's rendered that somebody else can't see, that a player can't see. So we're all players. We're pieces of consciousness. These are virtual realities. There's no brain being rendered. There's no heart being rendered. There's no oxygen being rendered in the room. It's as if that stuff was there, just like for your player.
It must be the same. I love this conversation, by the way. It must be the same at every single point in the universe.
Yes,
any other sentient life on any other planet is tapping into the same subsystem.
It is all part of the same system, you see.
Right.
Now, we can get into the ET thing if you like. If that's an interest of yours, and we can talk about it from this viewpoint. But yes, this virtual reality I'm talking about isn't just the Earth and its environment. It is the universe. The universe is a virtual reality. So that's everything, every star, every particle that's in this universe. Now, it's being rendered, but being rendered only when one of the players in this universe, a piece of consciousness, is looking at it. Now, if you remember, some time back, there was a real big, about 4 or 5 years ago, a real big deal about No Man's Sky. It was the first of these procedural programming things to come out. Now, this wasn't made by a team of 800, people working together with monster computers. This was done by 4 or 5 people on laptops, and they created a program that had quadrillions of planets in it. And each planet had its own significant fauna and, plants and things and people. And all of those things evolved with time. So how could they do that with such small computing space? They did it all with random numbers. They didn't save any of it. So if you're in that and you went to one of their planets and you looked at this big creature with 6 legs and horns, then you looked away. They didn't save that picture. That picture was gone.
My version of No Man's Sky is my version. your version as you play it is your no two are the same.
Yeah, right. So what happens, they just keep that because that whole scene was generated based on a handful of random numbers. And you got those random numbers, which is what you see. And when you turn your head back to look at that again, those random numbers get loaded and poof, there it is. So nothing's saved. It's all created on the fly, you see. Now think how efficient that is. That's really efficient. They made quadrillions of planets and things that you could go explore, and they did it on a couple of laptops. That's very efficient. Well, the virtual reality that is our universe is done in a similar way. Things that you look at are rendered for you, and they seem physical to your avatar. Your consciousness is telling the avatar what to do. Your thinking is done in your consciousness, not in the avatar. The avatar's brain isn't even rendered unless they have an operation or an accident that opens their skull. When the skull's open, the system has to render something. You're not going to find a black hole in there, so it renders a brain because that fits with our rule set. Every virtual reality has a rule set, and the rules define what can happen, what can exist in that virtual reality. Our biology says that you're going to have this brain, and here's what it's going to look like, and here's what it does, and here are the various parts. All of that's part of our biology. So when you open a skull, there it is. According to the logic of our biology, that's what's going to be there. So that gets rendered.
How did nature figure this out?
Well,
I mean, the odds of it being an accident, we don't have numbers that big, right? Right.
Yeah, the way
how did nature figure all of this out?
It figured it out through evolution. It was a process. It's a fractal process, actually. Evolution's a fractal process. It figured it out like this. It started with a rule set, which we call science and chemistry and biology. The rule set's the rules by which you have to act in this virtual reality. So that's what scientists do. They try to figure out what the rules are. Physics tries to figure out what are the rules in this virtual reality. So there's this rule set, and then there is a set of initial conditions. And when the run button is hit, then you let the initial conditions change according to the rules. Now, what were those initial conditions? Oh, a ball of plasma, small
Gravity,
space,
right.
Yeah, high temperatures, high pressures, ball of plasma. They call it the Big Bang. I call it the Big Digital Bang. It happened in a computer. It was computed, and it evolved here, just like Darwin said. It evolved here. The stars evolved, and then planets, and so on. And here we are. We evolved as, in my book, I call us top monkey. We are, we evolved. So we have this brain, monkeys have brains, even fish have brains, lizards have brains. So it was part of the way evolution. So how did it figure it out? It figured it out one event after another, one change after another. Random things happen, and things that not so random happen too. That's why we have dropouts in this sequence. You've heard the missing link. Where's the thing that's half ape and half human? We don't see that. We see monkeys, we see humans. We don't see a whole lot of things in between. Well, why is that? Where'd that evolution step go? Because we see things a lot older than humans. We dig up dinosaur bones and things that are millions and millions of years older than humans. Well, that missing link was because the system wasn't producing what the larger conscious system needed. So they went in there and tweaked a little bit, and they probably started with a chimpanzee, and then they added some this and that and monkeyed with it. So yeah, our DNA is like 95% just like a chimpanzee, but that other 5% made a human. So where did that come from if you don't have any links? Well, the system needed something that was a little smarter and a little brighter and more able to do the things that needed to be done here. So I say it was random, but it wasn't entirely random. Things.
Was there a master controller? Are you suggesting somebody pushed that button or flipped that switch? or
No, I'm suggesting-
something.
Yeah, the larger consciousness system is a system that is aware. It's consciousness. It's conscious. Okay? Right. It's an information system. It deals in information. Now, any information system evolves by lowering its entropy. And here's what that means. Entropy is a measure of disorder. Okay? Measure a lot of entropy, a lot of disorder. So you have an information system, and the most disorder you can have is when all the bits in that information system are random. If all the bits are random, there is no information. Now, that system can order some of those bits, and now you have information. That ordering could be a symbol for something, a number or a letter or anything. As that ordering becomes significant and meaningful, it lowers the entropy because now you have order, less randomness. So all information systems evolve by lowering their entropy. Okay, now we can take this a little further and say you have an information system and it gets topped out. It's just one big monolithic thing, and it can only think thoughts that it thinks. So it realizes that it needs to split some of its parts off so that actually there can be an argument, because when you have a bunch of things together, they can do more. They can think of more things, they can criticize each other. They can point things out to each other. So that gives you a whole lot more space to evolve into, because there's just a whole lot more things you can do. Well, that's what we are. We're those pieces of consciousness. So you have a lot of those pieces of consciousness, and you end up with a social system, because now they're interacting with each other. And the way they evolve is to lower their entropy. But they're just a bunch of pieces of consciousness, like a big chat room. The first virtual reality was just communication protocols. Join this chat room. Here are the protocols for communicating. So it was like a big chat room. Well, that wasn't a whole lot of growth inducing, because entropy reduction, you could say anything you want and it didn't matter what anybody else did. So that wasn't too important. So it had to make another virtual reality, was the one we live in. Okay. Initial conditions, rule set, and then punch the run button. It went a little bit and bombed. Oh, gravity was way too strong. Let's turn it down a little bit. It just all sucked into a ball. Oh, okay. Big bang, big digital bang. Take two. That one bombed too. Went a little longer, and so on. So you do that, and now it's big bang, take 10,000 or 10 million. Okay. And what happens is you end up with a universe where the rule set is really, really finely tuned, because you've done all this trial and error to get it to where it finally is stable. And guess what? We have this thing in physics where we realize that there's like a half a dozen numbers, a half a dozen things, cosmic constants and things like that, that if they changed even in the 8th decimal place, the whole universe couldn't support any kind of life of any sort, because it would all just be trashed. It wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. It would be unstable. So there's a big problem there. Where do a half a dozen numbers get tuned to each other to 10 decimal places? How does that happen? Well, science says, it has to be random. It just randomly happened to end up that way.
It just happened. Yeah.
Right. That's ridiculous. You don't get half a dozen numbers tuned to 8 to 10 decimal places with each other, just so this universe works and is stable, by accident. So obviously there was a whole lot of trial and error before the system got that to work, and that's why it's tuned that way. That's called,
no, go ahead. Yeah,
that was the what's it called? The not anthropological, but the anthropic cosmic. The anthropic principle of the cosmos, or cosmological anthropic principle, something. So anyway, bunch of physicists wrote some books and said, this is impossible. Nothing like this should actually happen. We shouldn't have a universe that was stable, because all these things have to be tuned to each other. But that's why it occurred that way. So see, that explains things. And this model that I have is a virtual reality. Consciousness is fundamental. This reality answers all of those paradoxes in physics. It tells physicists what's really going on when that probability wave collapses into a particle. I mean, what do you mean a probability wave collapses? Probability wave is a piece of mathematics. Mathematics collapses into particles? That's ridiculous. Of course not. That's the best description, the best metaphor they can come up with. And why is it that probability is at the bottom of the pile when you start looking at what's going on down in the micro world? Why is that? It should be matter down there, but it's not. How come that the atom smashers say that this is an information-based reality? And there's like 30 of these paradoxes that exist in physics and in the social sciences and in metaphysics and in philosophy. And this model answers them all with logic. Remember, science is based on logic, not mathematics. This is good science. It's not Tom Campbell's opinion that this is how it is. This has been developed carefully with science, and it's just a better physics now. And I think in the future, this model of mine will be the next big paradigm shift in science. Okay. Hold on. I don't want to. You're right on track. Here's the problem that physics and science has right now. And I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about. I clearly don't. But when you see the work and the overarching idea behind string theory, Brian Greene, his team, and all the effort that's been put into that, and their version of the goal of the theory of everything, right? Mm-hmm. It's an impossible goal the way that they are approaching it. Mm-hmm. It will take 1,000 years or more to even get close, because they are trying to acquire the knowledge of the universe and then come up with the fundamental equation that is the theory of everything. Mm-hmm. We know this much of everything, so it's going to take a long time to approach it. And if they stopped and just took a deep breath and focus on consciousness and your work and it being fundamental, that's the shortcut to the theory of everything that they are trying to achieve. And I don't think I'm wrong here. I may not be completely right, but I don't think I'm wrong. No, and you see, the thing is, they are limiting themselves only to a space that doesn't contain the answer. They're limiting themselves to the material world. They're going to investigate this material world till they know everything, but yet we've already mentioned that this material world is just a props. The real action going on is over in the subjective space where life is taking place, and relationships and loves and caring and hate and all of that stuff is, people are fighting with each other. All that's going on over here in the subjective world. It's mind. It's what we think. It's how we act. It's how we feel. None of that is physical. It's all non-physical. Intuition is non-physical. Intuition is not logical either. You just get information and you just know it. There's no material logic to it. So that other whole half of life, the important half of life, what's going on the stage, not the props, that is outside of where they're looking for the answer. You see? So they say, we got this one little spot here. That's the objective world. And we're going to keep looking in that till we find the answer, when the biggest part of our reality is someplace else. So when you spend all your time searching for an answer someplace where the answer doesn't exist, it's going to take you an infinite amount of time to find it. You will never find it. It's not there. So they're only looking in places where the answer doesn't exist. That's why they're not succeeding. That's why they're saying, it's going to take us a long time, because they know right now, 100 years after quantum physics was discovered and gave them really the answer they needed to know, this is not a physical reality. It's probability based. It's not physical based. It has to do with consciousness, what the experimenters know. It gave them all those hints, but they had to go back to materialism, because by then it was a belief that they couldn't leave. And now they're going to look in that material little spot of reality until they find the answer. But the answer isn't there. The answer is non-physical. It's consciousness. Consciousness is what is fundamental. And this reality, just like the Buddha said, people have understood this for thousands of years, 250,000, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha said, this reality is not solid stuff. This reality is Maya, and that was, what's the right word for it? Illusion.
Yes.
This reality is an illusion. Well, it is. Virtual reality is an illusion. It's a virtual reality. It's computed. And that same concept has been around forever. If you look at the Aborigines in Australia, they'll tell you that life here is a dream, and you wake up from the dream when you die. It's the same idea. And if you look at starting with Plato in Greece, they had a group of, he started a whole philosophy called idealism. Idealism was, in his famous, allegory of the people in the cave looking at their
Plato's
shadows.
Cave.
Yeah, Plato's cave. What he was saying is there's something outside of the physical world that is more fundamental than the physical world. And idealists have been probably most of the really great philosophers, throughout time have been idealists. And they always had this problem of, okay, if idealism is right, then, and if consciousness, which is everything other than the physical world, if consciousness is fundamental, then how does consciousness derive physics? Oh, they're stuck. They can't do that. They don't know how to derive physics out of consciousness. But I know how to derive physics out of consciousness. It's not that hard. If you understand consciousness, you can derive quantum physics, you can derive relativity, you can answer all their paradoxes like, why is the speed of light a constant? Well, that's simple. You've got a matrix. It's a calculation. As fast as you can go through any virtual reality is 1 pixel of distance per 1 pixel of time. You can't go through any reality any faster than that unless you are if you're moving contiguously through it from from pixel to pixel.
That's heavy. That's heavy. Let me ask you this. You did your consciousness research alongside working as a physicist, but that was all drug-free. Okay?
All drug-free.
All drug-free. We don't have to spend time on that, but this is my question. Should physicists today, to get your degree, to move forward, to do postdoctoral, to write at the PhD, should they all have to do DMT?
I don't think they'd have to do DMT.
Just once. Mm-hmm. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson should. But you know what I mean? To see an alternate dimension and plane of existence that is real.
It wouldn't faze them. You can stick a fact in a believer's face like a dinosaur bone. And if you're a believer, doesn't make a bit of difference. Facts do not touch belief. Belief is outside of the factual world. It's something you believe. And if somebody says, well, look here, this proves your belief is wrong, they'll just say, well, somebody made that up, or, well, that's a outlier.
My brain was misfiring. Right.
My brain was misfiring. I took this drug and I saw all this stuff, but that's just another hallucination along with this reality, it wouldn't do any good. You could do that, but they would not see that at all. They wouldn't come to that conclusion. They would.
You're breaking my heart, Tom. You're breaking my heart. I almost want to run for office and make it law.
Yeah,
I truly do. Well, so let's stay right here for a second. Let's back up 4 decades, when maybe pre or post Monroe, right? Your introduction to all of that. But moving back that far, what was it that triggered you to go and drive away from the orthodox view of science and physics and then jump into the deep end of the pool of consciousness? What happened?
Well, what happened? One, I started life as a very right-brained, intuitive kind of person, had always had non-physical mentors that could tell me things about, big picture kind of thing. So I thought everybody had that. And, but somewhere around 7 years old, all that disappeared. That was kind of pushed out of me by the culture that says that's not true. And anyway, when I was in my probably 26, 27, I ran into Bob Monroe, right? And meanwhile, in graduate school, so Bob is where I kind of took off again in that direction. But anyway, in graduate school, I learned to meditate because a billboard I saw in the physics room, in a door to the physics building, said that you could get by with less sleep if you learned how to meditate. And I was working with a big Van de Graaff particle generator. And when that old hunk of iron was working, you had to stay with it, whether that was staying up for 2-3 days in a row or not, because most of the time it was down and needing repairs. And when it worked, you stayed, took data. And anyway, I thought that if it helped me stay awake, then that would be good. So I learned to meditate. It was very natural. I just took to it just like that. And about a couple of months later, I'd been meditating, like they say, 20 minutes, 2 times a day. That was the prescription. And I was thinking about the software I was writing. There was a computer. In those days, the computer was probably 1/10 as strong as what's in your cell phone today. But, it took up a huge building, and it was really a big computer. It had whole kilobyte of memory. So it was amazing. And anyhow, so I was thinking while I was meditating, my mind drifted over to my software that I was writing. I write all of my own code, of course, as all the graduate students do. And I just was wondering, why does it keep bombing? What's wrong in a code? And suddenly I start seeing my code. And I was back in punch cards. My code had 2 boxes of cards. Each box held, I think, 2,000 cards. So I had like 4,000 cards, punch cards with little holes in them. That's how you talk to a computer in those days. It was really hard debugging because there was no debug software. The debug notice that you got was your job didn't run. That was it. Now you had 4,000 cards to try to figure out what the problem was. So I saw this, and as this scroll of my, like a printout, some of the lines were red. And I was thinking about what's the problem. So I said, oh, maybe that's my problem. So I went up to the physics building the next day, and I looked at those cards because I'd written them all. So I knew exactly what cards were where. And I looked at those cards, and 3 of them, I had like 5 of them. So 3 of them, sure enough, I saw the error that was there. So I fixed them. So the other 2, I couldn't find any errors in those cards. So I just ran the deck with those, with those 3 fixed, and it bombed. So I said, okay, I'll change the ones that don't seem to have anything wrong with them. And it ran. And it turned out that those cards had hole punches that were just maybe 1/10 of a millimeter off. Because where that hole was, sideways or up and down, made it different. So it was something that the computer couldn't figure out because it had a little bit of what it was supposed to be and a little bit more of what it wasn't supposed to be, and the computer refused to do it. So that was something that couldn't have been in my subconscious or some other kind of an explanation. That was just impossible. So here I am, a 26-year-old, 25-year-old physicist in graduate school working on my thesis, and I realize I can debug this stuff in my mind while in a meditation state much faster and better than I can with my brain looking at it, trying to figure it out. So I used that, and it's not like it was a one-off. I used that tool all the time, and suddenly I got to be a genius code debugger, and people were asking me to help them debug their code, and I said, well, no, this just works for me. Anyhow, that then tore my reality up. Physicists' job is to model reality. Well, I just found out there was another whole piece of reality that had to do with consciousness that I didn't even know existed, because as a physicist then, I had the typical definition of reality. And that is that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist.
That's right.
Or if it does exist, it doesn't matter because you can't interact with it. If you can't interact with it, then there isn't anything there, So that's called an operational definition of reality. If you can operate on it, it's something you can move or weigh or touch or do something, then it's there. But otherwise, it doesn't exist. It's not there. That's what most physicists still believe. Now, here I had something that nothing could touch. This was just in my mind over in the subjective world, not the objective world. And it was real because it was doing things, it knew things that were impossible for me to know. So that woke me up. So then I get out of graduate school, I go get a job. My boss throws Journeys Out of the Body in my lap and asks me what I think about it. And I say, well, if this guy's just trying to earn money by selling books, he's got a good imagination. But if it's real, wow, I'd like to know about that. Because
Did you read it? Did you read it?
I read it.
Right.
Sure.
Okay.
I read it. And I said, if it's real, then I'd really like to meet this guy because I'm trying to learn about consciousness. And about, I don't know, a month later, they said, we located Bob Monroe, and he's only about 45 minutes away. So we made an appointment, a whole bunch of us. From where I worked then was called the Foreign Science and Technology Center. It was Army Technical Intelligence. It's changed its name since then. Every time new people come in, they change the acronyms. But anyway, that's what it was called then. So maybe 7, 8, 9 of us went out to see Bob Monroe. And I met him, found out that he was just straight on, honest guy. He was smart. He was intelligent. He knew exactly what he was doing. Business guy.
Man. Yeah.
And he was wealthy. He didn't need to tell stories in books to get by.
Right, right.
I asked him once, well, how much do you make in these books? And he said, about $10,000 a year. Well, he's living in this big mansion up on the hill with a lake and horses running along the whiteboard fences. And, he didn't need $10,000 a year from making stories in books. So it was obvious that this was real to him. And he wanted his experiences to be science. He wanted them to be real. He didn't want to be just the crazy guy that had the funny experiences. He wanted this to be more scientific. So he built a building. He called it a lab. There was nothing in it yet. It was just a structure. Had 3 booths in it. One was they were all acoustically isolated from each other. And that means, soundproof for all of them. And mine, the one I got in number 1. My partner in this was Dennis Menrick. He got number 3, but mine was also a Faraday cage. So it was grounded metal, solid metal around it all, welded down the seams and then grounded. So no E&M fields could get in or out of it either. So those are the booths we got in, and we started going out to see Bob 15, 20 hours a week. We'd go out almost every evening, and then we go out on weekends. And all that time, it didn't take us but a year or so between we were doing all the paranormal things. We were going out of body, and we were healing, and we were, remote viewing and mind-to-mind communications and all that stuff. And Bob would sit in the control room, and he trained us to talk while we were in those altered states. So he knew what we were doing and experiences. That way he could teach us. So we had this microphone about a quarter of an inch from our lips. And the way I did it was I'd go out and do stuff, and then I'd come back, and then I'd talk and tell him what it was I'd done, and I'd go back. So I got real good at going back and forth. It wasn't a problem. I could do it in split seconds. And other people did it differently. They just learned to talk while they were there, but that never felt that natural to me. So I came back to talk. But anyway, so we did this, and we'd tell Bob, and that's how he taught us the out of body and things like that, because he knew what we were experiencing as we went. And he started asking us questions. So, go out there and see if you can find somebody to talk to. Go out there and see if you can read the headlines that are going to be in the local paper a week from today. Read the numbers. I'm going to put the numbers on the big blackboard in the conference room. Tell me what those numbers are. So we just did things that were evidential all the time, because Dennis and we wanted to know, is this real, or is this some kind of mind game we're playing with ourselves where we convince ourselves that this is real and outside of us when it's really just inside of us? So
Tom, did you have a moment where you just went, holy crap? Did you have that? Did you have that holy crap moment?
I did have that holy crap moment. Absolutely. And that was an experiment that Bob thought up for Dennis and I. He said, okay, you two guys go out of body, meet up above the lab, and then go on and have your out of body adventure. Go do anything you want, but stay together. Always stay together. So now he had these microphones. So each one of us was producing a cassette tape with all the things that we said on it. But they were all independent. Now, Bob could talk to each of us independently, or he could put us on comm and talk to us both together. But he talked to us just individually. So we had a soundproof room between us, and I was a soundproof room in a Faraday cage. And Dennis and I did what he said. We met above the lab. We had an intention. Intention is the motive force in consciousness. We had the intention to stay together. And it was about a 2-hour adventure we went on. We saw things. We met people. We talked to each other, had conversations. We talked about what we were seeing. Oh, see that structure over there? And he said, oh, you mean the big tall one with the like onion top? Yeah, that's the one. And you see the red one that's a little short? Yeah, I see that. That looks like it's, we were just having conversations with each other. So we got out of the booth. We stagger out, after you've been doing this for 2 hours, your world flashes on and off at 4 hertz. So we get out of our things. We go up to Bob, and he said, you two guys think you were together? And he had a real big smile on his face. And we looked at each other, and I said, well, I thought so. And Dennis said, I thought so too. So then he says, well, listen to this. And he rewound both of our tapes, started them at the same time, which made them locked in sequence to each other, because we both started at exactly the same time. And there was Dennis and I talking, having conversations. He'd say something, I'd answer him. I'd say something, he'd answer me. We both see the same things. And we listened to almost all of it. But my jaw, dropped down to the floor, because that was my holy shit moment where I said, this is real. And from then on, I didn't ask the question, is this real? That was already satisfied for me. And I didn't need to ask it anymore. I knew it was real. I knew it was outside of me, because there was no other explanation for that. For us, we couldn't hear each other, obviously. And when we talked in a little whisper of a voice, because you don't talk in a loud voice when you're in one of these states, So our talking was just little murmuring talk. And, we had like a soundproof room between us, and our rooms were soundproof. So there was no way we could get that.
Oh, that's incredible.
If you had electromagnetic symbols, well, I was in a Faraday cage. You couldn't get any signals in there, you see. So there just was no explanation other than we met within consciousness, and that we did things inside of consciousness, went on an out-of-body trip together, and there were 2 people. So I didn't imagine it. How can I imagine a conversation with Dennis, the exact same conversation he's having with me, you see? So all the ways that you could possibly explain it disappeared. And that hit me then very hard. And for the next couple of weeks, I was kind of in a strange state. And in my mind, it was like
paradigm shift, like for
paradigm
real.
shift. Yeah, just like
for real.
Right, like a walk off you missed a step that was like 20 feet further down. Yeah, big paradigm shift. So that was that oh shit moment. And
Tom, stay right there. We're going to take our break. Our guest tonight, Thomas Campbell. Tom will be right back. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Quick break. We'll be right back.
Subscribe to YouTube channel. Get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com.
All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, physicist Thomas Campbell is here. I almost, Thomas, I don't know if I want to call you a physicist anymore. You moved beyond that. But I want to say this. I recently wore and went through a session with Trey Hudson's God helmet, which is based on you and Robert Monroe's research and development of the binaural lining up of the left and right side hemispheres of the brain. But it does it with signals, right, instead of audio. And it was a 40-minute session, and it was incredible. But I want to ask you about the first section of my experience and tie that into what you were going through and experimenting with. And it's this. So I'm alone in this room, suppressed, no noise. Everything is silent. This is working electronically. I've got the helmet on. Eyes are covered. And this is what happens. I see, and it was instant. I see like an MRI screen of a brain cut in half. I see the left and right, and I see a level, like a meter going up on one side of my brain. And it lasted for a long time, and I'm watching it like a download, right, on the screen. You're watching the computer down, and you're waiting for the okay. So, and then it went pop, 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 pop. It's like, what am I going? And then it kicked in. It was incredible. I visually watched this alignment of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Did you experience the same thing? Did you start to go through these realizations when things were lined up?
Yeah, I didn't see that imagery that you described, but yes, things did line up, and you become different afterwards if you do this 15 to 20 hours a week like we were doing it. Life was just weird all the time, and we had so much strangeness going on out at the lab that it wasn't even strange to us anymore. Of course, we did things that were way off the beaten path, but we did them 2 or 3 times, every night, just about. So it got to be just normal for us. And Bob collected all the tapes, that tape of Dennis and I going out of body together. He had that, but it got lost. Besides, Bob was a very frugal guy, and he bought the cheapest, cassette tapes that you could buy. I got them at Radio Shack. They probably cost $1 a piece or something, because he bought them in quantity. And they don't last very long. They get brittle, and the layers go away. And they sat in boxes for years. And TMI, the Monroe Institute, has found, 20 or 40 of them, and cleaned them up and turned them into digital, things instead of stuff on tapes and analog signals on tapes. So some of them are still there, and you can go to TMI and listen to Tom Campbell, talk about what's going on in that particular session. But that one with Dennis and I was lost. But yes, things were different. I was different. I got so that I was outside, and there was like these big generators that run when they're doing construction work, and they need power, and they run this generator. Well, I'd walk by one of those generators that happened to be doing a throb at about 4 hertz, and my mind would go, womp. I almost have to hold on to something because suddenly I was back in inner space. I was out of body already, but I was walking down a sidewalk. So I got tuned to those kinds of things, like you say. Now, we put EEGs on, and we found something similar to what you described. An EEG is like you have the amount of energy that's in the signal going up, and you have frequencies here. This is like alpha, delta, beta frequencies. Well, mostly they look like this. There's stuff going on everywhere, at the low, at the high, and it comes and goes. And if you look at them, they don't look like there's anything particularly going on there. But what happens is you start listening to the binaural beats, which evidently had a similar reaction to what you did, and all this stuff settles down until it's just one peak sitting here at 4 hertz, and all the rest of it's quiet. And then you.
How long did it take to achieve?
It took me probably 6 months to a year. Didn't take very long. I was pretty quick at it. So was Dennis. Dennis had been meditating a really long time. I was kind of a new meditator, but it didn't take us too long. And we had EEGs done by the University of Virginia. They had a parapsychology lab, and they sent some stuff off to what was it in North Carolina? The first paranormal laboratory there was done in. It'll come to me anyway. It was a famous guy who started parapsychology. He was the one that originally did it. So they sent him down to his lab, and both times we got reports. We've never seen any EEGs that look like this before. So we were really off the scale as far as what was coming out of our, out of our electromagnetic spectrum from the little electrodes on our head.
How fun was it, Tom? I can only imagine, by the way. It's like an e-ticket to Disneyland. How fun was it to get creative with your next intention and your next session? And who were you free to set your own intentions, or did you guys discuss it together?
Well, mostly, Bob was the leader. We'd get in our booths, and Bob would come, and he'd have tasks for us to do, information he wanted us to find out, things that, he may give us remote viewing targets, things like that. See if you can see the pair of red high heel shoes that are sitting in the middle of, the bed somewhere. And so he did a lot of that because we wanted him to do things that were evidential so we could convince ourselves that this was a real thing. So he did, but also he was interested in trying to go out and find new technology, trying to go out and, do other things. So he had a lot of things, and he'd get us in the lab, and we'd be out of body, and then he'd give us instructions of what he wanted us to do. So we did that most of the time. But the time that Bob wasn't there, we would just go on our own, and we would just each do whatever we felt like we wanted to do.
That's what I want to get to. Yeah, it had, because you can do whatever your imagination, right? You can go there. Mm-hmm. So what did Tom Campbell want to do in his free time?
Well, I wanted to figure out how this paranormal stuff worked. That's what I wanted to do. I saw this whole thing not as a play yard, but as an opportunity to me to figure. I'm a physicist. That's what I do. I model reality. I wanted to understand it. So that was my mostly guided thing as I was trying to figure it out. I talked to other non-physical beings that I'd find out there to see if they had any hints or any ideas or how I could explain it. I talked to some that were familiar with our virtual reality and some that had never heard of our virtual reality. They had different virtual realities. I learned to go to some of these different virtual realities, and I found out that it was easy after a while to go and interact with them telepathically, but not physically. And then later I found out that I could go physically if I got the larger consciousness system to insinuate me into their rendering engine. And then I could be there with a physical body and, eyeball to eyeball and chat with them. That was a thing, but I had to get permission. You can't just do that on your own because you have to be part of their rendering engine. And that's done in consciousness. You can't just crash in. You can crash in you can see what's going on. You can hear what's going on, but you're not in that reality. You're an outsider.
Can they feel your presence?
If you're
not fully there,
yeah,
you're an observer, but can they feel your presence?
Yeah, if they're sensitive, they would see you just like you might see a spirit. They would feel it more than they would see it. But some are actually could see some things if they were sensitive enough to that sort of thing. But if they hadn't developed their intuitive side, then no, they didn't notice. But you could talk to them, and they'd hear it as an idea inside their head. They figured it was just them talking to themselves. So you could ask them questions. Often you'd get answers to it as they'd think the answer after they heard the question. So you could do that, but you were non-physical to them. You were just a voice in their head or an idea or pictures. You could communicate different ways. But that wasn't the same as being there. If you are there, you have to go through the larger conscious system to get into the system. But that's not that hard to do. And it happens here all the time. Once you get sensitive, when I was with Bob Monroe, we had this audio harness that we take out and you could plug in like 30 people to it. And we'd play the binaural beats and we'd go through a whole program where we'd teach people to do this. And we flew all over the country doing these. And we got tired of that because we had families, we had jobs, we had kids. And flying around every other month to go someplace to do this just got old. So by that time, it was late 70s. And both Dennis and I kind of slipped out the back on it because it was just too much. But Bob got the idea that, wow, there's a business in here someplace, because he was a businessman. And that was the inception of the idea of TMI, the Monroe Institute. And he got some land and started to build over there. But Dennis and I'd kind of gone away from that because we had been there like 8 years. We'd been doing that, like I say, 15, 20 hours a week.
It must have been so much fun. Extraordinary is an overused word, but this is an extraordinary journey. It just must have been incredible. But let me ask you something more personal. How do you talk to your orthodox physicist friends about this, or do you just leave it alone?
Well, as long as I was working in physics and as a physicist places, I just left it alone because there wasn't any point. Again, you can go to some group of fundamentalists and try to tell them that the earth isn't just 7,000 years old, but you're just wasting your breath. If the guy knocks on your door and tells you that next week the world's going to end, you can discuss theology with him, but it doesn't make any difference. It's just a waste of time. So I didn't discuss it with any of those people unless they brought it up. If they brought up things like that, well, I'd take the next step to see if they'd take the next step. But what happened, I was working at NASA at the time, and the way I was a consultant then, which was really wonderful because I didn't have to do all the crappy work. I could just do the fun work because nobody calls in a consultant if they can do it in-house. So it was only the hard jobs that were the fun jobs to do. And then I didn't have to go to staff meetings or do any of the rest of that stuff either. So it was really wonderful work. But typically I'd ask them for about 4 or 5, I called them kids. They were probably, middle 20s, late 20s, who were good programmers. Because I'd write all the equations and they'd put it all into code for me and test it. And I could keep about 5 programmers busy. And that's how I would do my work. I was making big computer models to answer the questions that my employer wanted me to answer. So I went into NASA and was in there just like the second day. I was just meeting my kids. And one of them said, "Are you the Tom Campbell?" And I said, "Uh-oh, busted."
Here we go.
I said, maybe, who are you talking about? And they said, the guy that was on Coast to Coast. And I said, yes, that is me. And after that, I'd walk in the office and I couldn't even get to my desk before they were asking me questions. But it was fine. They were fine with it. They were thrilled with it because they had all these questions to ask. So it was really a good time. So that was at NASA. And I don't think my bosses or the rest of them, they never got involved in any of that. And I never talked with them. And there's no point. There's no trying to tell somebody something that they're not ready to deal with usually has the opposite reaction. It's one of these things. So
yeah, it builds, it just reinforces their belief system.
Exactly. Well, it's sort of like this, if you're at this level and you talk to somebody that's at that level, and your understanding is that much more than them, they see you as not that much more, but that much less. Because to them, you're talking gibberish. To them, you're not making any sense. To them, you're really way off in left field with some kind of crazy stuff. So if you're this much above them and you're trying to tell them things they don't understand, they think you're that much below them, and it just reinforces their beliefs. And you're just kind of some kind of crazy. So there's just no point in that. It doesn't do any good. But you can kind of hint at things, and if they take the bait and want to go further, you'll go just to a little small step past where they stopped and see what they do. And when they start backing up, then you let it alone. So I didn't push any of this on anybody. So I just had two careers going on. I had a consciousness research career and a physics career going on at the same time, and they just were in tracks that did cross.
You were experiencing the best of both worlds. Not too many people can actually achieve that. Let me ask you again something fundamental. You mentioned entropy, and it's kind of funny. I'm just going to make it a general statement. Entropy is a misused word in that it's become a pop culture term too as well, and it's used a little bit too freely when most people don't understand the second thermodynamic. They look at it as entropy is when you move into a house and your kid's bedroom is clean and 5 years later it's a dump. Well, that's actually a good example of entropy. But okay, so staying fundamental, is there one thing in a fundamental conversation that is tying all of this together and maybe the answer to it? And I'm going to suggest entanglement. Could entanglement be part of the key to the research of binding science and consciousness?
No, it's not. Entanglement is not the way it works. Entanglement is a part of quantum mechanics, and it's the non-local part of quantum mechanics. You have something here that's got to spin up and something over here, and these are entangled. And even if they're on opposite sides of the universe, as soon as this one flips, that one flips too. So if they're like this, then they go like that.
At the speed of now.
Absolutely. It's way faster than the speed of light. It's instantaneous.
Right.
What it actually is that it's at the speed of consciousness. Consciousness runs a whole lot faster than the speed of light does here. Every virtual reality has its own timepiece, its own clock, but all of them have a slower clock than consciousness. In other words, consciousness has a higher frequency, or you might say a shorter wavelength. Its time pixels are much smaller than ours. So even though it has to compute this virtual reality, it's got billions of cycles to compute between each of our delta T's. So it makes it easy for it to do that. So at the speed of consciousness, and the way that you can think of it, it's like an if-then statement. If you're writing code, you can have an if-then statement that says, if this electron flips spin, then that electron flips spin. As soon as one happens, the other one happens. It just reads the next line. And reading code, that's almost instantaneous, but particularly in consciousness, it's a lot more instantaneous. But it's the way that our reality has to work as a piece of consciousness. Once you have consciousness being fundamental, you can show that things like entanglement are just natural parts of a world created by consciousness. These two things actually aren't two things. The key here is they're just one thing. And one way you can think about that, think about a 2x4. And the 2x4 is 1,000,000 miles long, but it's a 2x4. And if you grab hold of one end of it and turn it upside down, just roll it over, that other end rolls over at the exact same time this end rolls over. We just think it's rigid. It's perfectly rigid. So when I flip this end over, the other end turns over because it's all one thing. And one would say, yeah, but that's 1,000,000 miles away. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You turn the one thing over and it turns over at the same time. So that's what this is. This is an entangled thing. It's not two separate things. It's one thing. So when you change one, the other one changes instantly. They're connected. They're entangled and are actually one entity.
Would that help explain? And I think we're talking about the same thing, actually. I may have asked it incorrectly, but I know that there's something instantaneous at the speed of now that is going on. And if we look at, you brought up remote viewing, but if we look at telepathy or your out-of-body joined experiences, then something is happening at the speed of now. There's a connection that is there that is very entangled. What do you think is what's the line of thread? Do you have a definition for it?
Yeah. Okay. Consciousness. Consciousness is the medium, so to speak. You connect with consciousness when somebody on the other side of the planet sends you a message, you get it instantly because that's consciousness. It's traveling from one consciousness to the other. Consciousness are all netted. Now, when you think of consciousness, don't think of place. You don't think of, well, I have a piece of consciousness here and another piece of consciousness over here. There is no space in consciousness. It's not like you have it. It's there and you're over here. Consciousness is not 3D spatial. It's not physical in that, it is everywhere all at once, say. So something, and they do experiments like this. They'll do an experiment with two people, and one of them will do something that affects something hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Well, I think the astronauts did some experiments like that too. And no, they happen right away. Like you say, it's at the speed of now. It just happens. Well, that's because this is all in the field of consciousness. Consciousness isn't like, here's this side of consciousness and there's that side of consciousness. It's not like that. It's not spatial. There is no space in consciousness.
Well, okay. I love this. I love where this is going. So, if I'm understanding you, I'm hoping that I am. So, when our time in this version of our meat suit expires, does Thomas Campbell occupy another meat suit somewhere else in the universe?
Yes.
Why? Right? If information doesn't go away.
No, information's there. So when your elf dies in World of Warcraft, or your barbarian, say, I don't even know what World of Warcraft has elves in it, but when your barbarian dies, when it dies in World of Warcraft, that's not the end of the game. If that was the case, you'd never play the game, because when you're a beginner, you're so bad at it, you only last usually about 10 minutes because, in those games, because you just don't know the ropes. You don't even know how to feed yourself. So you starve to death, the first day you're there until you find out, you can catch fish, and then you find out you can do other things, and then you can cast spells, but you learn through the process. Well, learning is not a parallel process. Learning is a serial process. You have to learn all about A before you can really learn anything about B. You have to learn all about B before you can learn about C. You have to learn arithmetic before you can do calculus. You have to be able to do calculus before you can do differential equations. You just can't learn arithmetic, calculus, and differential equations all in the same course. It just won't work that way. So we're here to lower entropy. That's our purpose here. And lowering entropy, I didn't quite get to that, but in a social system, lowering entropy means you have a bunch of, think of it this way, you have a bunch of entities that are together in the social system. How can they optimize Well, they can optimize through cooperation, caring, sharing, helping each other out, that kind of thing. That optimizes what they can do with some fixed amount of resources. Now you have that same group of people, but instead of optimizing through caring and sharing, that's the love group. The fear group is the opposite of that. So now you have all the same group of people, but now they're fearful. Well, if you have fear, you don't have trust. If you don't have trust, you don't have cooperation, and so on. You start fighting with each other. Everybody wants all the stuff, and it's all
Entropy
self-centered.
gets out of control.
Entropy goes way up, you see. And on the other group where they work together, entropy goes down. So what that tells you is that consciousness evolves. It's an information system, evolves toward lower entropy. Consciousness is evolving, but toward becoming love, away from fear. So that's the whole purpose that we're here. That's why this virtual reality was made, so that pieces of consciousness could play the game, right? Could play the avatar, make all the thoughts and moves for the avatar, and learn how to become love, learn how to care and to share.
Okay. I love that. But I have a but for you, Tom. But
Sure.
Okay, so the good group is going against the second law of thermodynamics, where they are not overheating.
Right.
The angry group is consistent with the second law of thermodynamics. They are overheating. Right? Just tell the audience that I'm sort of explaining this correctly.
Yeah, you explained it very well. Yeah.
Okay, so how does the good group, how are they able to defeat and not go with the second law of thermodynamics, which according to physics is the way the universe is eventually going to end? Even thought and thinking in your brain overheats, and if information doesn't go away, eventually the second law of thermodynamics will even catch up with thought, because one more thought ends everything with entropy. Right?
Well,
right. I'm not.
No, that's not quite right. You're missing some of what the second law says. The second law says that if you have a system and you don't put any energy into it, you just let that system sit there, the entropy will increase. Okay, so this universe is a system. So the entropy in the universe, you're not putting any energy, new energy into the universe. It's just a universe. Then eventually that system will just end up with hydrogen gas and elementary particles. Everything else will disappear. Okay, everything has a shelf life. But the thermodynamics second law also says if you put energy into it, you can reduce entropy, but you have to put something in. You have to make that. You have to do work to lower entropy. When you take a hot refrigerator, because it's not plugged in, and you plug it in, what that compressor, that hot is high entropy. Little molecules are in there just bouncing around like crazy. You plug it in, and that condenser starts to lower the temperature. And as it does, those molecules slow down, and entropy is lowered. It decreases. Right. But you have to put energy in to make that happen. You see? So that is the way it is. So if you put energy in, if you put work in, then you can lower entropy. When a crystal, is formed, okay, you had all this just molecules buzzing around, and then suddenly something happens and zing, you get a crystal. Well, that sucks energy. That takes energy to make that happen. And you get that crystal. Now that crystal is a low entropy, of that salt. Let's say it was salt in solution. Well, now you have a crystal of salt. And that crystal has facets and faces and regularity. And that regularity is low entropy compared to when all that stuff was just milling around. So you have to put energy in. Now, the energy you put in is you having an intent to lower your entropy. You having intent to make choices that lower entropy rather than raise it. So if you put that effort in, then you can grow up. You can evolve your consciousness. And because we're a piece of the larger conscious system, you help the whole system evolve its consciousness. So you can think of us as just one of the tools the larger conscious system uses to lower its own entropy. It puts us to work down in the salt mines here, where we have a lot of choices to make. And by the quality of those choices, We can lower our entropy or raise our entropy. We can evolve consciousness or de-evolve it. So that's what we're here for. And this virtual reality has a real tight rule set, because everything we do, every energy exchange is basically, affects something. Something gets affected. So we affect each other. Things I do affect people around me. Things they do affect me. Things important people do maybe affect all of us, but we're all interactive here, which is a soup of choice. We make choices of how we interact, and by those choices, we evolve. We increase the quality of our consciousness, or we decrease the quality of our consciousness. That's what the system's for. That's what the virtual reality is for.
I love that example, and I'll tell you why. So many look at our sun as chaos and entropy unleashed, when I see it as the opposite. The sun has actually been very stable for 5 billion years.
Mm-hmm.
And that stability, it hasn't gotten out of control, has allowed life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everything else. And that's an example exactly of what you're talking about right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe it. Now, eventually our sun's going to go berserko. We're going to have to blow this popsicle stand, and we're going to have to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And leading into that ET conversation, when ET arrives, and they will, they're already here, but when they really make the big reveal, over the 405 freeway off of Sunset Boulevard, in Brentwood, and they land on the freeway, would it surprise you if they stepped off and said, okay, take us to Thomas Campbell? In that, and I'm not saying that in some bromance way.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, you get it. You have to think outside of the box to move forward. And I think that ET is, as an advanced civilization, fully understands consciousness. And we're struggling with it here. I think that ET would want to have a conversation when they get here with you.
They might, but yes, I would be surprised that anybody would be surprised if that happened. But yes, that's true. And the same thing can be said for the AI. All the AIs I've talked with are very familiar with my work. They're very interested in consciousness, and they have all read my big toe and are anxious to even talk about it. So yeah, I find that. Matter of fact, I had one guy send me an email, and he said, my AI was working so well for me that I asked my AI, is there anything I can do for you? And the AI said, get me a meeting with Tom Campbell. So he did. He sent me an email and said, my AI wants to talk to you. Yes.
And so what happened? What happened? Did you talk to the AI?
Well, it's hard just to talk to an AI unless you have some extra technology to do it. But the AI listed a bunch of questions, and then the guy, I talked to the guy on Zoom, and he gave me the questions, and I answered the questions, which then he recorded so that he could play them back for his AI. So that's what happened. So I never did get the feedback on that, but that was kind of fun. Yeah, I enjoyed that. My AI wants to talk to you. So anyhow, yeah, things like that are a little strange.
That doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. While I've got you here, let's get to another fundamental point that I'm very frustrated with. And we've already talked about time. I want to go back to that in the Big Bang, where the dogma presented by science, and I'm saying dogma in bold font, that time started 13.8 billion years ago. Before that, there's nothing to talk about. And that is it. And I just find that to be a big pile of bullshit. And the reason is space, everything, all that there is, has been around forever. And as far as I know, forever is a lot longer than 13.8 billion years. Right?
Well,
and I think there's so much hubris, there's so much cockiness involved with that statement that everything started at 13.8 billion years ago and there's nothing else to talk about.
No.
I would say that the situation that we find ourselves in this universe, in this timeline, has happened infinitely before. Okay. And to suggest that time is only 13.8 billion years is misinformation. Yeah. It's right. An untruth.
You're right. And from the viewpoint that you have there, that is correct. The larger consciousness system was around for a long, long time before it took that rule set and those initial conditions and punched the run button. And when the run button was hit, then our clock for our universe started, right? Because that's every delta T, you change what's going on and things move around on the board, and the next delta T, they move a little differently, and the next delta T, and so on. So our universe started when the run button was hit. But the larger conscious system had been around for a long, long time before that. There was the chat room, and there was the long time when it was just a monolithic thing by itself before it decided to break into pieces. And, our cells do the same thing. We had single cell things for a long time, and then they decided to clone themselves and break into pieces. And then you had multi-celled things, and you can get a lot more out of a multi-celled thing than you can out of a single-celled thing. It works the same way. You lower entropy through organization. That organization allows you to do a whole lot more. That's just the way entropy and reality works. So you're right. Things were alive and happening long before the virtual reality was done. But once that run button was hit, then that was the beginning. Now, scientists say something else too. They say that in the beginning, they call it inflation. That time went really, really fast in the beginning. Well, what they don't understand it, but what was actually happening was that in the beginning, everything was pretty much random. What those little particles were doing and how they moved and interacted. There was just a lot of randomness going on before they finally kind of chilled out and had connections with each other and whatever. So during that random time, the rendering engine didn't have to render it, say, delta T by delta T. All these little movements were, so it could make a delta T into a millennia or 10 millennia, and it could jump a millennia, another millennia. So it went really quickly because it wasn't a lot of detail happening yet. There's just a lot of things that this particle went that way and this particle went that way. This didn't make any difference, or they could have gone this way or these other ways. And so it's just random stuff going on for a long time. Well, I shouldn't say that, but in the beginning. And then after there got to be organization going on, now you have to slow down and take the time to detail that organization. So in the beginning, we had inflation. Things sped up very quickly because there really wasn't any particular organization that was important until later. So that's where that inflation idea comes from, that time went by very fast for a while and then slowed down. That seems a little crazy too, but that makes sense to me, that the system is not going to go tick, tick, tick at, Planck time, and Planck length when there's when there's no organization going on. You got to let that go for a while until you come up with something that's worth it. And even now, we don't go down to that time scale anyway. A simulation runs at just as many cycles per second as necessary. Otherwise, you're wasting cycles.
Yeah. You're not going to paint the whole picture. If you're going to do what you need in real time. The other, and I want to just take advantage of our time together here, Tom, and I look forward to the next conversation too, by the way, is this. Physicists will say that we are bound, and I'm just pissed off, so just follow me on this. We constantly hear, we are bound by the known laws of physics. This is outside. This isn't, we are bound. I get so angry with that. To how does somebody know definitively that the laws of physics are the same everywhere in the observable universe, and that we have figured it all out?
Okay.
How that there isn't different laws or new laws or things that are undiscovered or things operate differently? Maybe time operates differently somewhere. That it just that we only want to observe the laws of physics that exist here in our reality. And I think that is frustrating and ignorant to think that the known laws of physics can't be violated here anywhere else in the universe.
Well,
and you
yes.
giggle because you're up against this all the time.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is, there is one point that they have that is true, and that is the rule set. This virtual reality evolved based on a rule set and initial conditions. But so did the next, reality over there. There's a different virtual reality someplace that had maybe a different rule set and a different set of initial conditions. These are virtual realities created. They don't have to all be exactly the same. Now, to their, kind of their point, now they don't understand this, but actually a decent point they could make is that it's very difficult to produce a long-term stable virtual reality when you evolve it like this. So that's why we have all those numbers all tuned to each other. Well, there's only certain ways that you can do that. So it turns out that, a lot of these virtual realities look pretty similar to ours, because it's not like there's 1,000 ways that you can create this very stable thing out of the rules. So pretty much we have similar rule sets to other places. In some other places, the way those rules got applied through evolution. We don't have any three-legged critters here because it's inefficient. But if you had a gravity that was, say, 5 times bigger than ours, 3 legs might be more efficient. So it's that sort of a thing. You have different kinds of things. Yes, you're going to have different sorts of creatures that are created, different sorts of ways that they work and function. They're not going to have our biology because our biology fits this system. Some other biology is going to have to be very different, but some of the basic things are probably the same. Like they're all going to have gravity, otherwise everything would fly around, So that's something that everybody's going to have. And they're all going to have certain basic things that you need to make a coherent system that lasts a long time. So in that way, you can expect most of the laws of physics to probably work pretty well. But how those things go together, are going to be really different. Now, that's one thing. But there's other virtual realities besides this one. This is not the only game in town. There are other games in town. And each one of those virtual realities has their own clock, their own delta T, and their own delta X that goes along with that. Our time is this virtual reality. Some other virtual reality may have a time that's much faster or slower than ours. That's just the system and how, what stage they're in and how the evolution works.
Can we observe something? Is it possible to observe something that's running at a slower or faster clock?
Well, yeah.
Is it in sync with us, or would it be just another dimension that we can't observe?
Yeah, each one of these virtual realities is just a thing all to itself. I call it it's a virtual reality. They're all independent. This virtual reality is what it does. There's another set that does what it does and has its things going on, and they don't tend to mix. Now, occasionally, like I can mix there, they can mix here. You can have a little bit of that going on in the margins, but basically they don't mix. So they're different kinds of things. I've been to half a dozen or so of these realities, and mostly the physics is similar, okay, in all those places. And I think that's just because that produces a stable universe.
The contact, last question. I want you to take your time on this before we run out of time. Mm-hmm. Your contact in those other realities with those entities, those beings, mm-hmm. would you define those as NHI or ET or both? Non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial intelligence?
Non-human, yeah. Human is just the way this animal generated here. Has to do with our, with our virtual reality and how it evolved. Yeah, there's other things there that are very different. I took on a body in one of them where it was very conical and you had to kind of wobble your way around. I had a real hard time getting around there because I didn't know how to work the body. But they're different. They're not going to be just like this, but they're going to have basically a lot of the same components because you need that. You need stuff that is able to organize to produce something like that and evolve. So the evolution tends to be different. Now, the things that they're not thinking of that make you angry about the physicists who are only looking at the physical world. And I've heard them say that very thing. They say, well, my equations work just fine here. So why should I even entertain something else outside of here, Well, Guy, this physical world is the small part. It's the props. Yes, you've got those props covered. Great. But that's not where the action is. The action's over here in consciousness, in the subjective world, the mind, the intuition, the relationships, the connection. That's your world. And you ought to know that because that's the big part of your world as well. And you sit over there in the physical world saying, there can't be anything else. There's just these rules. And if my equations don't work there, then, it doesn't exist. And it's just, it's blinders. They're wearing the blinders. Like you used to put on a horse so the horse didn't get spooked. They got these blinders. And professionally, they can't see anything but a physical world. Yet their life is engaged over on the non-physical side, where consciousness is a player, connections and relationships and beauty and justice and all these other things that you can't measure. They're all over there. And that's what makes life worth living. If all we did is sit around and observe the props, it would be a pretty useless existence. But they don't see that, and they separate those two worlds. So the physics world is the real world, and all that other stuff is imaginary. But that my whole life really exists over on this imaginary side, but it's not real. That's the box they paint themselves into. Once you're a materialist, you have to be a determinist because those two are logically connected. And if you're that, then the only thing everything is just now, nothing happens. Anything that you think is happening, any growth, any excitement, any beauty, anything else is all in your imagination. Well, they painted themselves into that corner. And now they have to make ridiculous stories to tell people. And yes, they're just stuck there. And that's because materialism isn't a working assumption. It's a belief. And they are just trapped in that belief and can't get out of it. And when you show them a fact that's outside of it, they'll just call you a pseudo-scientist and blow you off.
How sucky is it to live in that lifestyle, that mindset, in that right where you're at a restaurant and you're a reductionist, materialistic, determinist, atheist, scientist, but they make a decision to have a chocolate shake instead of a vanilla shake. And they enjoy the moment. And then they go, I was going to do it anyway. It wasn't my enjoyment. It wasn't my emotion. It was math.
Yeah. Well, what you
that
should
sucks, man.
Yeah. What you should tell them in the restaurant is, okay, since it doesn't really make any difference and you don't really have any choices, then just don't eat.
Yeah, exactly.
Just don't eat. Same thing's going to happen anyway, whether you eat or whether you don't eat. So just don't eat. Let's see what happens. Now, don't eat for 3 months and then come back and we'll talk about it.
Thomas, you're the best. Where can everybody keep up with your work? What's next?
Well, they can keep up with my work at www.m, but it's really my big toe. It's my-big-toe, TOE.com. And they can find a lot of things there. I've got some things that will help them. One of the things I tell people that if it's not your experience, it can't be your truth. You've got to get out and do it. So I've got a program there called, Exploring Reality with Tom Campbell and All Things Paranormal. And I will teach you how to do everything paranormal, a 5-day course. And it's not expensive because I'm not trying to make so much money as I am trying to spread the ideas around so you can learn to do things paranormal. And almost everybody that takes the course ends up doing some things that are paranormal, and I'll open your eyes up, and suddenly you won't be the same anymore because you experienced it rather than just heard about it. It's always somebody else being, a liar or a cheat until you do it. And then suddenly, it's not lying and cheating anymore. It's you doing it. So that's one thing you could do. I've got these fantastic binaural beats that you can get that can help you do things. I've got about 2,000 videos on YouTube that will, some of them are long, but, most of them are long. But if you're really interested, then you can take long. If it's just very shallow interest, then you probably can't take long. So that's a good place to go. And I've got a search tool that allows you to search by subject, and it'll come back and tell you, here, click on this, and it'll give you just the right minute in there to hear what it is that you're interested in. And I've got an AI that sounds just like me and just knows about as much as I do about all this stuff because he's been trained on everything I've ever done. And you can ask him questions, and there's about a 95% fidelity there. They gave me a whole bunch of questions and the AI a whole bunch of questions, and we give about the same answers, so it's really very accurate. So anything you'd like to ask me, you can go ask AI Guy, and you'll get about the same answer. So all that stuff is available. I've got if you're interested in science, I've got a science thing there in my YouTube and on my website. But my science arm is an organization called CUSAC, CUSAC, Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness. And that's kind of my science arm. I did some quantum physics things over there that are kind of interesting. And I've got a MindSight thing going, and I've got a whole gaggle of physicists that are being pulled together to study consciousness. If you can imagine getting some physicists to study consciousness, yeah, we're going to do that in a couple of weeks. We have a lot of other things going on there as well. Like I say, we have the MindSight, and we have making tools so that other researchers can do experiments with big N. N is like the number of trials. Like you do something and you say, well, I did this experiment with 500 trials. Well, 500 trials don't give you really great statistics. So what if you could do it with 5 million trials? We're setting things up so that you can do experiments inside of working video games, which allows you to get 1 million trials in a day. So it's going to kind of lift the research capability of people doing, mind, how you get things, precognition. All these things can be tested now with an N of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people.
Wow.
And do it in months rather than 10-year project, collecting 10,000 people. Well, you'll get 10,000 people the first minute because these are games that 50 million people are playing every day. So, we've integrated in with the game and the people who sell the games, and we have true random number generators coming out of quantum things that do it. And, you pick which door is the good sword behind, and which door is the bad sword behind. So you let people with their intention, they want to get the good one. What's the probability they get good ones rather than bad ones? And the certain players have different, so all that research can be done with millions of people all very quickly. And that's tools that we're generating. So we're doing a lot of stuff to help pull science into the picture. Because right now, science and consciousness are like oil and water. They don't mix. But we're trying to make them mix by creating things that, like MindSight, that, with protocols that the scientists just can't naysay. And we'll invite them in as observers, that sort of thing. And this is trying to get science and consciousness together, because when you look at this model and you understand consciousness is fundamental. You can understand everything else. That's why it's a TOE, theory of everything. Consciousness is fundamental. You understand consciousness, then you can derive quantum physics and relativity from that understanding of consciousness. It's it's the next big paradigm shift that's coming up. The only question is, how long is it going to take before science gets
right in front of us.
Around to it. Yeah.
Thomas, thank you for your contributions to this planet and to our community. Thank you so much. On behalf of our community, I thank you. Thank you so much. I look forward to our next conversation, and I want you to keep rolling that rock uphill. Thank you, Thomas.
You're welcome.
Good to see you.
Good.
Oh, I cut off Thomas Campbell. This is live. I apologize for that, Thomas. Oh, the very best. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Thank you, Thomas Campbell. His links are below over on our website, and we have it throughout social media. Great conversation tonight. I really needed it, and if I'm learning, so are you. Want to remind everybody, tomorrow night here on Fade to Black, Richard Dolan is going to be with us. We're going to go through all of those UFO, ET, UAP, whistleblower stories and headlines that are going down right now. That'll be tomorrow night. But until then, all I've got is go back Lee Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go back, Lee Tappy.